there's a big difference between the slavery in Old Testament and the slavery for the black people.
Yes.
Because the slavery in the Old Testament was mostly like an employee that is
Yes.
not paid but is protected, is
Right.
nourished, and they could not be beaten or whatever. But there's one passage in Leviticus 25. I'm not going to use the KJV because as a Frenchman,
Okay.
it's a bit hard. So I'm
Go ahead, Robert.
the CSB. Okay.
What does it
So
say?
it says you may also purchase them from the aliens, so neighboring countries, residing with you or with the family living among you, those born in your land. They may become your property. You may leave them to your son and whatever. But it say also, but if it's someone from your, like an Israelite, you cannot beat them up or something like that. It makes almost like the same thing as the black who were beaten up, and like it says, don't do it to Israelite. It make almost say that you can do it for aliens. How do you reconcile that?
There were privileges for Israelites because in Israel it was a theocracy. And so, for example, only Israelites could own land because you had to be a believer in Yahweh to own land in the Holy Land.
Why specify that the person from Israel should not be beaten mistreated?
Well, actually, they didn't think, if I understand this correctly, and this is not my area of expertise, Leviticus 25, but if I understand this correctly, they didn't want other Israelites to be taken in servitude. They would find another way to forgive the debt, okay? Because there were privileges that Israelite citizens had that people in the country didn't. But as 𝗏𝗃 points out, any other person in another country around Israel would have fled to Israel and be put under these rules rather than the rules they came from, because they had no rights or fewer rights in these other neighboring countries. So this is a great improvement. The other thing we have to point out, and 𝗏𝗃 points this out as well, Robert, is the Old Testament law is not the ideal law for all time. No. It is not. It was made for ancient Israel just for that situation. Now, there are principles in it that are universal, like most of the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not murder, commit adultery, these kind of things. But some of the case law and some of this minutia that you get into, not ideal. In fact, Jesus even says it in Matthew chapter 19. Here's what Jesus says about the Old Testament law. He says, Moses permitted you to divorce your wives because your hearts were hard, but it was not this way from the beginning. In other words, he's saying, I wouldn't have permitted divorce as God, but your hearts were so hard that I actually acquiesced. And the same thing is true when it comes to some of these slavery situations, really indentured servitude situations, that God's bringing people along incrementally. In fact, there's a parallel to this right now in this country. We've had Roe v. Wade in place for 49 years, illegitimately argued or decided, but it was the law of the land for 49 years. Now, as soon as it's overturned, notice how abrupt some states, including Vermont, decided to go way in the other direction and say, you can kill your child up to the moment of birth. If we're going to get people to adhere to a pro-life position now, we're going to have to bring them along incrementally. We're not going to be able to just say, well, we got to ban all abortions, because people are not going to tolerate that. Just like they wouldn't tolerate a complete abolishment of indentured servitude in Old Testament times. Let me give you an example of this. In Florida, Ron DeSantis knew that his state wasn't sufficiently pro-life to ban abortion. So what did he do? He said, okay, we're going to ban abortions after 15 weeks. Okay? Now, hopefully he can work further into that and maybe lower that as people become more and more pro-life. But if he had gone in and said, we're going to ban all abortions, he wouldn't get the votes for that. So what is he going to do? He's going to bring people along incrementally. Yet you see California, Vermont, New York, Massachusetts, some of these states, they're going so far now in the other direction to say, basically, you can't tell us what to do. We're going to kill children all the way to the second of birth. That's just depraved. How are you going to bring depraved people along? You're going to have to bring them along incrementally, and that's what God does here.